Welcome to the creative brain of Dean Hawk. Get ready to be challenged, inspired, and equipped to become a better ministry leader.
Hey, welcome to this month's edition of the Dean Hawk Leadership Podcast. I'm so glad to have each one of you joining us. Just want to encourage you, if you enjoy what you're hearing and learning on this podcast, please share it with any of your ministry friends, pastors, or church leaders. And before we dive into today's subject, I just want to say it's been a privilege to be able to help coach, listen, as some of you have utilized the Pastor 411. If you have any questions, things about church, ministry, anything going on personally that just want to kick the tires with somebody, that's what I'm here for. And that's what God has challenged me to do, is to connect with pastors, help, and coach in any way that I can. So if you'll shoot me an email, dean@rockfamilychurch.com, that does go directly to me. And then we'll set up a time that we can chat by phone, FaceTime, or Zoom. And would just love to help and assist you however I can. I just truly have a heart to help pastors succeed and learn from my mistakes and help you not make the same ones. All right, today we are talking about when pastors go turtle. And when we look at this ministry career, it is one of the most enjoyable celebrations of a career that we can have. But let's just be honest, we are in the people business, and the fact is that when you work with people, you are going to get hurt by people. And so it's one of the most rewarding jobs, but it's also one of the most painful jobs. And one of the most challenging aspects of a ministry career is when we get hurt or wounded by church members, by staff members, board, elders. Sometimes it's even strangers. And it might be a staff member, a board member, an elder that says they're with you, they love you, and I'm behind you. And then you find out that they're behind you because they're going to put a knife in your back. And so I'm just going to say it. Ministry hurts. When we pour our life into someone, we're helping them through a difficult season of their life. We're investing countless hours of assistance. We're counseling them. And then they just up and leave. They disappear. They go rogue, and we don't know what happened. And it just feels like we just invested all of this time, energy, and resources, and now where'd they go? I'll never forget, in the baby stages of our church plant, had a board member on our team and had been with us, and the church is just in our first 2 years of existence. And you know how that, I call it the shepherd's heart. You just know when one of the sheep are wandering, you just sense it in your heart. You can feel something's not there, something's not right. So Kim and I took them out to dinner and just wanted to celebrate them and talked with them and just asked them. I said, are you guys doing okay? Yeah, we're doing good. Do you have any questions about the church and where we're going? No, we love it. We're behind you, Pastor. We've got your back. We're here for you. And Kim and I walked away shaking our heads, and we said, the information we're hearing from them is not matching what we sense in our heart. We just felt a distancing, only to have about 9 days later an email come in that says, hey, I'm resigning my position as a board member. We're leaving Rock Family Church. God bless you. No reason, no rhyme, no rhythm as to what was going on. To this day, I have no idea why they left or what happened. But it just leaves you in that vulnerable state. And the same thing has happened with church members. I've had staff members in the past, just as probably you have. I don't need to share my war stories, but one of my most difficult ones was about 13 years ago, actually about 15 years ago. had a very challenging staff transition where a staff member just told bold-faced lies about me. And we lost families in the church. And none of them came to say, Pastor, is this true? This is what he said. He was toxic on his way out. And no one came to say, Pastor, what happened? And what's your version? And so I'm going to just share with you, it's what I call, as you saw when you maybe saw the email or the title of this podcast, is when pastors go turtle. When we get hurt, when we get wounded, when people step on our toes, when people lie about us, when people say things, when people leave and abandon us, and we thought they were a friend, and just suddenly they just up and leave. Those things really hurt. And what I have found that for me and most of my pastor community of friends is that our first reaction is to pull back in. We want to pull into that turtle shell, pull our arms and legs back in, pull our head back in. And if you're not careful, it's okay to do that for the moment. You know, that's what a turtle does, is when there's an immediate danger, is they pull back into their shell to be protected. But you can't stay there. And so I want to just share some things today of just some of the results if we stay in our shell, if we stay in the turtle mode, and then I want to give you some steps to get out of it. But when we get hurt, when we get wounded, and we pull into that turtle mode, if we stay there, what happens, number one, is we're isolated and lonely. We don't get close to anyone, and we don't allow anyone to get close to us. We don't embrace friendships and make ourselves available to the members, because if we get close to them, if we like them, they're potentially going to end up leaving us, leaving the church, and hurting us. So secondly, we don't trust anyone. And thirdly, we now expect the worst, and we expect to get hurt by people because they hurt us, and that person hurt us, and that staff member and that leader hurt us. And so number four, we now give the appearance and play the role of being a pastor and a leader that is accessible and loving, but the people know it and we know it. We keep people at a safe distance so they can't hurt us. We don't really let anyone into our world. We never share anything that's really going on in our lives. I'll never forget back in the day, many years ago, one of our elders, I'd gone to a gentleman who was on our elder team, and John Maxwell had always talked and taught about having an accountability partner, a prayer partner, and I really felt led to reach out to this individual to ask him if he would lean in and step into that. And so we met on a monthly basis, and he had a list of accountability questions, and there were things that we would pray over. And I opened my soul to him. I told him the things that were going on. I was transparent. I was vulnerable. And it was actually a very good connection. It was a positive relationship. And it was about a year into that accountability prayer partners relationship that he came to me and he said, I think we're going to go to another church. I think we're looking for a church that has more of a move of God, or allows the Holy Spirit to move at a greater level than what you're doing here. I blessed him. I loved him. He'll never know what kind of impact that had on me. It was hard. It was tough. I was opening up to this relationship, this friendship, this camaraderie, this partnership, this prayer gathering, and really embrace that here was someone older than me that I was looking up to, that I esteemed as someone that could be a voice of wisdom in my life. And then suddenly they say, hey, you're not spiritual enough. Your services aren't what we need, what we're looking for, so we're leaving. I'm going to tell you, those things sting. But here's what happens. Number 5, we reproduce our wounds in others. It distorts our vision and it wounds those around us. And what happens is, we've heard it before, hurt people hurt people. And we don't want to hurt others, but we end up hurting them. And there's a story in 1 Samuel chapter 14. It's about Jonathan and Saul. It's where Jonathan says to the Philistines, bid us to come up there. And he said, if they say come, we're going to go. We know the Lord is with us. And that day, a great battle with God's hand on the Israelite army for a great victory was happening. And so Jonathan is off taking out his Philistines. All of the Israelites who were in hiding come out of hiding, and they rally together, and they're moving forward. But in 1 Samuel chapter 14, it says, in verse 24, it says, "Now the men of Israel were pressed to exhaustion that day." And listen to the word because Saul had placed them under an oath, saying, "Let a curse fall on anyone who eats before evening, before I have full revenge on my enemies." So no one ate anything all day. Even though they had all found honeycomb on the ground in the forest, they didn't dare touch the honey because they had all feared the oath they had taken. But Jonathan has been off in battle. Jonathan had not heard his father's command. He dipped the end of his stick into a piece of honeycomb and ate the honey. After he'd eaten it, he felt refreshed. But one of the men saw him and said, "Your father made the army take a strict oath that anyone who eats food today will be cursed. That is why everyone," watch this, "that is why everyone is weary and faint." Jonathan's reply in verse 29 is this. He said, "My father has made trouble for us all," Jonathan exclaimed. "A command like that only hurts us. See how refreshed I am now that I have eaten this little bit of honey. If the men had been allowed to eat freely from the food they found among our enemies, think how many more Philistines we could have killed." So whatever was going on, the bitterness, the hurt, the wound that the Philistines had caused in Saul's heart, he made a declaration that no one will eat today. Make a vow. No one will eat today until we take out these Philistines. Now, it seemed patriotic potentially. It seemed maybe as a powerful leader. But his own pain that the Philistines had caused in his heart caused greater pain in his men, and ultimately shortchanged the victory that he could have had that day. But due to the bitterness in his heart, it impacted the people around him. Number 6, what happens is we end up doing ministry from a defensive mode. And if you only play defense, you're never going to put points on the board. You have to play offense. And so we play defense in our relationships. We play defense that we don't want to offend anyone. We don't want anyone to get mad at us. So we always are just in guard, protect, and defend mode about the organization, the ministry, and what we're going to do. And so when we only play defense, we don't see any points on the board. And as a leader, if you're not careful, will end up blaming the people and making things worse, when the reality is we're the source of the problem. Which leads us to number 7. We reap what we sow. Our members, our staff, and our leadership, because we're suspicious of them, are going to be suspicious of us. They can't get a read if we're happy, we're mad, or glad. So we've said, don't get close to them. We've kept them at arm's length. And so now they can't get a read where we're at. So now they're going to struggle in their followership to follow us, because now they're suspicious. Now they're not sure, is Pastor mad at me? Is he frustrated at me? And so it leaves everybody in limbo, And actually what happens is the gap widens. And ultimately, what I've seen happen in pastors and church leaders' lives is ministry becomes so painful, so hard, and so draining, we end up quitting. Back as we were coming out of COVID in March of 22, Barna Research found that 42% of pastors considered quitting in the previous 12 months. And if we think back to those COVID days of mask and no mask and how far are you going to put the seats apart and when are you going to have services? Are you going to have live services or just online services? And are you pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine? There are all those kinds of things. We're going to talk a little bit more about that next month on our influence and how we use that. I encourage you to check back in October. But I want to shift gears here now and just take the last few minutes and talk about how do we break out of that shell? How do we break out of the turtle mode and get back to loving people, doing ministry when someone has hurt us, when someone has wounded us, when the pain of ministry is very real and we feel like I don't want to do anything, I don't want to even be around people anymore? How do we get restored and how are we renewed? When someone slams your character, when someone leaves the church, what do? Number one, we must choose not to be defensive. And this one is hard because every fiber of your being, when someone slams you, lies about you, says things that are untrue, your flesh wants to scream from the mountaintops what they did, how they lied, how they deceived, and you want to set the record straight. But here's what I know. Defensiveness only feeds the fire. You see, when there's a falsehood that is presented, we want to set the record straight. And so we think, I'm going to throw water on that fire and I'm going to let people know the real truth. When in reality, when we take that bucket and we throw it, it's toxic, it's gasoline. And what I have found is defensiveness only increases the fire and makes things hotter, causes the other person to flare up, which they become even more toxic. And so our role model in this situation is Jesus. They called him all kinds of things. They lied about him. They said he was a false prophet. One even said that he was of Beelzebub, that he was of the devil, there's nothing more contrary. Imagine that Jesus is of sin and darkness and the devil is what they were accusing him of. But something I learned from him is this. He never defended himself. He let his life and the fruit of his life speak. He never defended with his words. So when people have lied about me, said things over the years, I just choose to allow my 40 plus years of ministry, of integrity, of character, of loving people, of treating staff well and treating staff with grace. I let my fruit speak for me. I don't need to defend myself. Number two, we focus on the mission and ignore the madness. You see, the goal of the enemy is to use all of this as a distraction, to distract you as a leader, to get you off point, to get you distracted from what has God called you to do. You don't end up studying as much in your sermon because you're all wound up about this. You don't end up praying as much because you're just so frustrated about what's going on. It's a distraction of the enemy to stop the work of God that is going on in your life, in your church, and in your ministry. And so what are we going to do? We're going to stay in our lane. I'm called to love people. I'm called to be a disciple, to live, love, serve, and give like Jesus. I'm called to fulfill the Great Commission. And I'm going to, no matter what people say, I'm going to stay on point. I'm going to stay in my lane. I'm going to continue with the mission. Thirdly, we must choose to let it go. We must forgive. And Jesus said, we must bless them. We must choose to let it go. Forgiveness is God's path to healing our soul and healing our relationships so that we can love again. You see, forgiveness sets us free from the offense, from continuing to harm us. I've used this illustration for years, and if you're watching by video, you can see it, but otherwise you can understand. Unforgiveness is like a rattlesnake. It's like us holding on to the tail of the rattlesnake. And as long as I hold on to the rattlesnake, it's going to do what it was programmed to do. It's going to continue to bite me and release its toxic venom. That's what unforgiveness is. We have to let go of the offense. And ultimately, unforgiveness will hinder all of our relationships. It's like if I'm out in the garage and I'm working with some wood and I get a splinter in my hand, and quote, that relationship with the wood caused a big splinter. Now every time I greet somebody, now every time I shake somebody's hand, there's pain. Well, it's because I didn't get the offense out, the splinter out from that relationship that I had in the garage with the wood, and now it's impacting all of my other relationships. And so we have to realize that choosing not to forgive only hurts us more than it does the other person. You've heard this said, but I'll repeat it, and maybe it's new for some. Unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Because what is it? Forgiveness isn't condoning what that person did or condoning that offense, and it's maybe not even releasing that offender from the consequences of their decisions. But it's us coming and saying, I choose to pardon. I choose to release and forgive as Christ has forgiven me, as my Father God has forgiven me of all of my sins and mistakes. I'm going to extend that same value. I'm going to extend that same love to them. And then the frosting on the cake is when Jesus said, we should pray for those who spitefully use us, that we're to love our enemies and bless those who curse us. In the reality, when we bless and we pray for the person, I believe that's what breaks the chains that hold our soul captive. I have found that when I bless that person and I pray for them, it truly releases the heart of God, where I can, if that person walked in the room today, I could look them in the eye and there wouldn't be those feelings of anger and animosity. And so what do? Number 4, we have to dare to love again and again and again. I know some people that have pastors that have been in ministry for decades. They have no relationships. They're lonely. They don't embrace their staff. They keep everyone at a distance, even other pastors. They have taken the turtle encounter to the extreme, and they're lonely and they're dry. If you're in that situation, my heart goes out to you. If you're in that situation, I dare you to give me a call, reach out to me, and let's have a conversation about it. But here's what I know. Ministry is a heart-to-heart transfer, and you can't do that when you keep people at a distance. One of my counselors years ago said this to me when I was more or less kind of pouring out my heart and whining about being hurt by someone in the church. And I said, it makes me not want to be open again. And he said this, he said, one of the definitions of vulnerable is a willingness to be hurt. You know, I can think back and I can count on my hands of the different times that people have truly hurt me, offended me, and wounded me. But what I cannot count are the countless numbers, the hundreds and thousands of people that are a part of my church, that are a part of my leadership, that are a part of my staff, that love me, that value me, that accept me, that pray for me, and that love me, and that I esteem, as Jesus said, I no longer esteem you as servants, but I call you friends. And so in that light, I encourage you to keep loving people. The other day, I was with a member of my church and had invited him to tag along on a speaking engagement that I was doing locally, and just asked him to hang out with me for the morning. And this is a gentleman that I've been coaching, personally mentoring, just growing, helping him grow in his walk with Jesus Christ. And as we were driving back, he said, you're a very unique pastor. And I thought it was in relation to, I had just spoken at a Bible college here in town, and some of my craziness and zaniness and things that I'll do in communication. And I said, why is that? And he said, I don't think I have ever had anyone love me or accept me the way you have. And that meant the world to me, because I dropped him off at his place, and I left with just a huge grin in my soul that this is what ministry is. Ministry is loving people even when we know they're not always going to love us back. But it is oh so good when we see the true value of God's word, that love never fails. I can think back to countless staff members. I'm thinking back to a youth pastor of probably about 10, 12 years ago that I had to let go just after a short season of being on staff. And it was a very hard transition. It was very difficult. And I ran into him about a year later, and he came up to me and big grin, gave me a big bear hug, and he said, thank you. And I said, really, for what? He said, thank you for calling me out, and thank you for letting me go. He said, it's what I needed. And he said, began to share what God had done in his life over the last year, began to share how God had been speaking to him, how he saw that potentially he had been a little prideful and a little bit arrogant, and that the situation had humbled him. And here's what I can tell you. He took that situation, he rebounded, he ricocheted, and he has been faithfully serving, advancing the kingdom purpose and doing excellence of ministry in the midst of that difficult season that he and I had. And God has used him and blessed him. And so it's cool to see the fruit that came out of that very, very difficult situation. So continue to love, open your heart, reach out. Some of you need to call somebody, some of your leadership that you haven't fellowshipped with, and say, hey, I want to take you to dinner. Hey, I'd love to spend some time and grab a coffee with you, and begin to open your soul, begin to open your heart to your staff, to your team, and to your members. Get out of that back room, hang out in the lobby, love people. They're waiting for your love. You are the only Jesus that some of them will ever experience. You are the tangible awareness of who God is to them by showing and demonstrating the love of God to them. Check out all of our resources at deanhawk.com. Latest series have just been released. They're being posted. You can always see those, take those, make them better, make my sermons better, make them yours, and bless the people there in your church and your community. We'll see you next month. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us today. For a free sermon series and teaching outlines by Pastor Dean, visit us at deanhawk.com. Be sure and join us next month as we continue our growth on leadership.